And now we want to hear from the investor perspective. So how do the people that finance these startups and plan on the global expansion view the world? And for that, we've got a great presenter. Arama Kukutai is here. He's the partner from Finistere Ventures. They are a major AgTech investor, as all of you know. And it'll be great to get Arama's perspective. Arama, are you on?
Hey, good morning, Walt. I am indeed. Thank you very much. Here we go. I think I managed to get the video going. Just checking that you can hear me okay. And I'm also being joined by my colleague Gil Miron. I'm here in San Francisco today, and Gil's calling in from New Zealand, actually. So we're spanning a few different time zones here.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, and we can hear you great.
So, Walt, thank you for the kind invitation to myself and the Finistere team here to attend. I just want to acknowledge the great work that Western Growers has done and is continuing to do in helping build the technology and innovation ecosystem, particularly in relation to automation, the other topic that has brought everybody here together today. As you mentioned, I'm one of the partners at Finistere Ventures. We're a specialist agri-food venture capital fund and have been investing for the last 15 years in ag and food related technologies. So today's discussion, I think you'd asked me to come and really provide some commentary and overview, particularly in relation to our activity in Israel. And you might ask, actually, what is somebody with an accent that's not a US accent, but not an Israeli one either, talking about Israeli technology? And in part, it's because Finistere's approach to innovation investing has spanned beyond the US and particularly has been focused on activity in Israel. Gil, on the call here, has been one of our partners in the Israeli market for the last 5 years. I'll ask him to say a few words and just provide some background and thoughts about the evolution of the agri-tech space in Israel. I know we have a number of companies presenting today too out of Israel. But perhaps just to make a couple of comments as an overview, it's now just over 20 years since I first went to Israel, actually in relation to the farming enterprise that I was one of the founders of, looking for new technology to help us actually with pastoral farming and dairy all the way on the other side of the world in New Zealand. And why? Well, really because Israel, as it's often known, the startup nation, has really been one of the world's key centers of excellence in research and development through to applied commercialization in many, many fields. But in particular, and of particular note, in the last decade, in agriculture. And really led by, I think, quite a unique ecosystem of research institutions, of the highly educated technology workforce, but also an entrepreneurial spirit that sees, this small country of 8 million people pointing out to the world and looking for opportunities to take their ideas, their innovation, and their technologies to a broader audience, really every corner of the planet, but particularly into the United States, where, of course, Israel enjoys a very special relationship at a country level. But at the industry level, we've seen more than 450 startups in the agri-food space. A pretty staggering number given the size of the country. And in the last 2 years alone, more than $400 million of investment that has flowed into the agri-tech sector, including into companies that are focused on harvest automation, crop solution products, agro-analytics, all of which I think are of interest to the audience and to the group today. Finistere ourselves have made several investments, more at the analytics end. So we're investors in a company called CropX in the sensing irrigation recommendation space, and a company called Tyrannus, one of the pioneers and leaders of high-resolution digital imagery. But again, we've also evaluated a lot of companies that are coming through in the robotics and automation space, which as you get closer and closer to the farm and have a higher hardware component, I think these are companies that become particularly relevant to the mission and the work, Walt, that you and Dennis Donahue and others of the WGA group are focused on with both today's session, but also in some of the projects you proposed and we'll be discussing today. Hardware is challenging, right? It probably is no surprise to anybody on on this conference today, challenging in a lot of ways, including getting past early prototype development and into commercial scale up and commercialization. And it's important that we get the opportunity with young technology companies to be able to test and trial their products and concepts with real users, with farmers and growers who know what they're about and know what they're looking for in terms of both a practical solution and a return on their investment. And one of the early conversations that myself and Jennifer Place, I think, is also on this call from Finistere, had with Dennis was around the range and diversity of solutions that the Western Growers Group and members need across, at the time we were talking, I think, as many as 20 different crops. And so that poses an additional layer of challenge. How do you adapt solutions so they are capable of covering a pretty broad range of specific crop types and still do so in a way that it's going to be both economic and commercially scalable for both the technology partners as well as for the growers? I think this remains a significant challenge, but I think one which your proposed approach here today, looking at ways, for example, to bring field trials to life. How do you start to scale and drive adoption? And frankly, including a feedback loop to the technology startups so that this is not just technology push, but that solutions are being developed and provided that really meet pressing and appropriate concerns and addressable concerns of the farmers and growers. Companies that are on the line here today, like Tevel, FFR, and there are many others coming actually out of Israel that are really highly well-funded, but highly intelligent solutions to the challenges facing us in farming, I think are going to be at the forefront of finding adoption and maturity of hardware solutions and automation, and particularly in field harvest, which is, again, not been a short journey. It doesn't promise to be a short journey even looking forward, but it's a journey who I think his time has certainly come from a standpoint of the maturing of both investment coming into the space, and I think, Walt, a recognition by Western growers of its core role in helping bring the technology ecosystem together. So let me pause there and pass to Gil, because I'm sure he'll have some additional comments he'd like to add, particularly in relation to his view and his take on the Israeli technology scene. Gil, if you can hear us, I think you're on mute. And let me just put myself on mute here and pass to you.
So hi everyone, and thanks Arama for this high-level introduction. And if I may add, I think Israeli entrepreneurs had AI and robotics on the radar for many years. There was a lot of background, really local historical experience, especially through aerospace and defense, and also very successful research in computer vision. And this moved from aerospace and defense to fields like automotive technologies. You may have heard of the Intel acquisition of Mobileye for north of $15 billion. And so these were some of the drivers that helped these areas flourish in AgTech, and this was coupled with another local trend that, especially in the last 2 decades, there was a huge shortage in workforce for agriculture, rising local costs and the effective closure of the borders for cheaper foreign labor. And due to the small size of the country, there was very little workforce flexibility. So many entrepreneurs identified and thought of this field, sometimes with it's a naive approach because of the distance from the market, and therefore different market different market characteristics. But it was still the approach for many of these companies is the focus on initial applications mentioned, whether it's a company like Fruit Spec that started by counting the fruits on the trees to help you find the supply chain, or a company like Aruga that identified the challenge of pollination of tomatoes within greenhouses, and in a very, very robust approach, trying to solve for the critical problem rather than the entire solution, and grow from that. I think, as Arama mentioned, the cost of producing robotics is difficult and was prohibitive to the growth of some of these companies, but you can see companies like FF Robotics that I think were able to achieve a lot more than companies that raised 10x the amount of money using these unique market capabilities. I think the pandemic had a big hit on the progress on these companies, especially those that didn't have a footprint already in the market. Now, some of the trends that we see, and I think that's, again, it's typical for Israeli companies, is to look at breaking the market into different segments of the value chain, and looking where software and where integration is needed, rather than looking at building a full solution, again, due to the cost and the distance from the market. So it can be companies that built, that retrofitted old devices like tractors with I guess a kit that can turn old tractors into autonomous vehicles, or companies that again build software platforms, and that's on one end of the spectrum. And on the other end of the spectrum, companies like Blue White Robotics or companies like Trellis, that their focus was on integrating different technologies, but in closing the full end of the supply chain. And Blue White Robotics built a platform that they believe will enable large growers, be platform agnostic, and they can do large-scale operations, leveraging on their experience from large-scale aerospace automation, or companies like Trellis that just think of the entire supply chain. Another interesting approach was a company like SkyX, that, rather than investing in building large and expensive hardware, use the approach for a modular fleet of autonomous drones, again, leveraging from aerospace and defense assets and technology assets in Israel. And I'll pause here I don't know if people have any questions about the development in Israel and different trends.
You know, we would love to take questions, Gil, but I apologize. We're on kind of a tight agenda, so we're going to forego the questions at this point. I'll say thank you to both you and Arama for joining us today. We know you're busy, and we appreciate you coming in and giving us an update on the Israel scene. With that.